This is Mad Money. We love to highlight American manufacturing might, something we still do best. I like that, despite the endless naysayers. There's no better place to do so than at the Pratt Whitney division of United Technologies, where we journey today to meet Greg Hayes, the chairman and CEO of one of the best companies we have in this nation, United Technologies. The jet engine UTC's Pratt & Whitney's division makes, the geared turbofan, is an American engineering marvel using a far more environmentally friendly machine that uses less gasoline, leaves a much smaller footprint. Hayes took us on a tour of the Connecticut factory where they're made. At the same time, he addressed an issue that has caught America's attention by storm. The phone call from President-elect Trump to Hayes asking him not to move carrier jobs from Indiana to Mexico. It was the call heard around the world, and Hayes talked about the deal he made and the impact of that deal on United Technologies, on its shareholders, its stakeholders, and yes, the country itself. Take a look. Greg, I'm surrounded by incredible equipment. What is being made here, and how important is it to United Technologies?
So, Jim, you're standing in the Middletown, Connecticut final assembly facility for Pratt Whitney. What you see around you here today are the final assembly line for the geared turbofan engine for the A320 product line. The engines at the end
A320 being Airbus,
the
being
Airbus
a foreign
A320,
companies.
A319, A320, A321 models.
Okay. Now, why would I choose this geared turbofan over somebody else's engine?
Well, if you see the size of the fan, 81-inch diameter fan, that particular engine is about 16% more efficient than the last generation of engines that we were building, the V2500. Let me put that in context. Yeah. 16%. So we've got about 8,000 engines in backlog today. Over the next
order for 8,000 of these.
So,
okay.
Of those 8,000 engines, in the next 10 years, we'll save the airlines 11 billion gallons of fuel. 11 billion. Now, at $1.40 a gallon, which is, I think, Jet A today, you're talking $15 billion of savings to the airline. That's the biggest benefit. Okay. But on top of that, you've also got, so the technology allows us to reduce the particulate emissions. So we're going to take emissions down about 50%. That takes essentially 2 million cars off the road for 10 years by using our engines. The other piece of the pie, the third piece, of course, is the noise. Right. This is about 75% quieter than the engine that it's going to replace. So if you're at LaGuardia and you're over the flight path, today about 500,000 people wouldn't hear this plane coming in that hear the planes today. That's why we have 8,000 orders for this engine.
All right, how hard is it to make?
It's hard, right? You think about this engine. We've spent about $10 billion developing the technology around these engines. It starts with the gear. Right. And we have a star gear system, which allowed us to do something we'd never been able to do before, which is to spin the fan in the front at a third of the speed of the turbo machinery in back. Okay? That is the key to this entire architecture. That's why we call it the geared turbofan. By spinning the fan at about 8,000 RPMs and the turbo machinery at 24,000 RPMs, you optimize the turbo machinery and you also optimize the bypass. So the other beautiful thing about this engine, see, it's a lot bigger than the engines it's replacing, the 81-inch fan. It's got about a 12-to-1 bypass, which means most of the thrust is coming from the fan and not from the thrust of the turbo machinery.
Was that what's caused what your executive has said are teething problems in trying to get the backlog under control? Don't want to lose any orders to the other guys.
No. So look, we have had a number of teething issues. We've talked about that during the course of the year. Today, we've got 10 airlines using or operating this engine. We've got about 50,000 flight hours. And we've 99.88% dispatch reliability. And so while there remains some things that we're learning as we get more and more hours on the engines, I would tell you those are nuisance faults as compared to the overall design. The beautiful thing is the gear works. And I think that was the thing that people always were concerned about is, can you really put a gear on the front of a large turbine fan engine? And the fact is we've been able to do it.
Where does this fit in the vast panoply of divisions that you have at United Technologies, whether it be climate security, whether it be Otis? I mean, these are huge, important, and of course, carrier.
Right. So we've got 4 big businesses, right? Each one of them, I would say, global in scale. Pratt Whitney is about $15 billion in revenue today. Because of the geared turbofan, by 2020, 4 years from now, we'll be about $21 billion in sales as we ramp up production here. You compare that to our climate business with Carrier, it's about $17 billion. We've got the Otis elevator business, of course, you know, it's about $12 billion. And then we've got our aerospace systems business. And if you think about this big engine, almost all of the components that go around, the things that make the engine work, the FADEC, the Full Authority Digital Electronic Control, those are made by our aerospace systems business. That's about a $15 billion business as well. So think about $30 billion in aerospace, $30 billion in the buildings systems.
All right. So, look, obviously this is a key part of the United Technologies story, and so is Carrier. I know that you've been in a tough spot of late. I look at you as a guy who wants to make as much money for shareholders as possible. You are committed to doing that. You came up from the CFO ranks. You go to a board. The board wants to represent shareholders. The main thing that you and I would talk about is how much you can save and what kind of revenue. We look at these great engines. We know these are great sales. What happens when the government gets involved? Could you walk us through your side of what happened when President-elect Trump called?
Well, it's no secret. I got a call from President-elect Trump a couple of weeks ago.
Right before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, about a week before Thanksgiving.
Okay.
And he simply said, look, Greg, I need you to relook at the decision to close the Indianapolis factory of Carrier. He said, we're going to do a lot of things in this country that's going to make it a lot more conducive to manufacturing. We're going to take the tax rate down. We're going to reduce all this burdensome regulation. When all that happens, you're going to be printing money. But I need you to relook at your decision to close the factory in Indiana.
All right. Now, you have an obligation to your company. To relook at it means that you had done something that was that actually, Greg, hundreds of American manufacturers have done ever since NAFTA. It's been the right thing to do. We all accept the fact that I would be critical of you for not doing it because I care about the shareholders. How do you justify it? I mean, when you tell Mr. President-elect, look, that's not what I do. I make good stuff and I try to get the best costs.
So I had that discussion, and I had it with Vice President Pence specifically a couple of times as we talked about the fact that most of the supply chain on the HVAC side has already moved to Mexico. We've got about 1 million manufacturing square feet in Mexico already. And so this is just kind of a natural evolution to close a couple of our facilities in Indiana and move those down to Mexico. These are commodity products at the end of the day. Unlike the engines that you see here, right, where you've got a workforce here highly skilled, highly skilled, highly trained. I think the average employee here on the shop floor has got about 26 years of experience. Right? Very difficult to do, but these are the kind of jobs that we can do in America because they require high skill and high value add. The assembly lines in Indiana, I mean, great people, great people. But the skill set to do those jobs is very different than what it takes to assemble a jet engine.
Okay, but I'd like to know, there's no give without a get. We all know this. I mean, you'd like you to rethink it, but at the same time, everybody's going to get those benefits that you talk about.
Absolutely.
What specifically at United Technology? We hear about the $700,000 incentive, but that's obviously much less, $700,000 a year, much less than you would have saved.
So there was a cost as we thought about keeping the Indiana plant open. At the same time, and I'll tell you this because you and I, we know each other, but I was born at night, but not last night. I also know that about 10% of our revenue comes from the U.S. government. And I know that a better regulatory environment, a lower tax rate, can eventually help UTC over the long run. And so we weighed all of those things in making the decision with the board. But
you weighed it, not the president. The president-elect did not say, hey, by the way, Greg, have you seen how many engines that we buy from you?
Yeah.
Did not come up.
No, it did not come up.
Okay.
Nor was there any, I would say, deal. There was no quid pro quo to him to say, look, I'm not going to tax you if you don't do this. He simply said, take a hard look at it. We worked with Governor Pence, and I think we came up with a relatively good solution for everybody. We keep the plant open. We keep 1,100 people employed in Indianapolis. We still get to do the preponderance of the restructuring, which we were going to do anyways. So it's, I would say, no deal, but at the end of the day, a good deal for UTC.
How about for the United States?
So look, I think if we can see a renaissance in manufacturing in the U.S., that's a good deal for the U.S. But it's got to be a renaissance, right? And it's going to come from more thoughtful regulation and a more competitive tax rate. And I think those are the things that they're focused on. I know Paul Ryan is, Chairman Brady in Ways and Means. They're on the right track to do those things.
I mean, you make the best engines in the world. You are a true globalist. You have factories everywhere. Suddenly, it sounds like that you're being asked to be an American first who has to put other interests at heart, not just the shareholders. That was not the previous way that business was done in this country.
Well, Jim, I think it's more than just share owners. You have to think of the stakeholders, right? All of the stakeholders that you have in a corporation, be it the communities, be it the employees, be it the share owners, and you have to make a trade. At the same time, I would tell you the genie of globalization is not going back in the bottle, right? Free trade is still essential to the growth of this country. This country was founded on two principles, right? Immigration and free trade. And that is what made America great over time, because we had the ability to develop and innovate in the U.S. and take those products and sell them around the world, just like I sell Otis elevators around the world.
Are you put at a competitive disadvantage? I mean, the other guys may have moved their gas furnaces to Mexico. Suddenly, you do have. I mean, what's good about Mexico? What's good about going there? And obviously, what's good about staying here?
So what's good about Mexico? We have a very talented workforce in Mexico. Wages are obviously significantly lower, about 80% lower on average. But absenteeism runs about 1%. Turnover runs about 2%. Very, very dedicated workforce.
Versus America?
Much higher.
Much higher.
Much higher. And I think that's just part of these. The jobs, again, are not jobs on an assembly line that people really find all that attractive over the long term. Now, we've got some very long service employees who do a wonderful job for us. And we like the fact that they're dedicated to UTC. But I would tell you the key here, Jim, is not to be trained for the job today. Our focus is how do you train people for the jobs of tomorrow? Right. I've talked about our employee scholar program, the fact that
you're the second biggest after the government, according to what
so
your
we've
company
got,
said.
We've got 45,000 people have been through our employee scholar program, 38,000 degrees. We've spent $1.2 billion over the last 20 years educating our workers. We've got 7,000 people currently enrolled in this program, and the whole idea is improve your own marketability, improve your own skills, because the skills that you have today are not the skills that are going to get you through tomorrow.
At the same time, it's not, sometimes I feel like it's bad luck, Greg. I remember when you guys, and you were quoted, when you guys moved that factory from Nogales, Mexico to Florence, South Carolina, the big Otis factory. You felt that that was a good thing, but there were $60 million costs that first year. It's not as easy to reshore.
No, look, anytime you undertake a major restructuring, closing a plant, whether the plant's in Mexico, whether the plant's in China, or whether the plant's in Indianapolis, it is expensive and it's high risk. And so we did. We spent about $60 million extra to move the plant from Nogales to Florence. Today, it's one of our most efficient plants in the entire Otis network is in Florence, South Carolina. Great workforce, great productivity, and great products coming out of there.
Okay, now, when we talk about something like in Indiana, I mean, what happens? Trump calls. Then you work out the deals with Pence. He gives you some incentives, but it's nothing that really makes up for it. But you have a new view because you can't just be a globalist.
Well, look, you have to recognize the reality of the day, right? I always tell you, at UTC, we reserve the right to get smarter. And when the facts change, we have to be able to adapt. And I think that's exactly what I would say we did here is we understood that the facts have changed, something we didn't expect.
Right.
But we have to be adaptable.
But if you come up with a not competitive furnace, not competitive whatever, not competitive engines, you will lose to others.
Right. Well, and again, if you think about what we talked about last week, we're going to make a $16 million investment in that factory in Indianapolis to automate, to drive the cost down so that we can continue to be competitive. Right. Now, is it as cheap as moving to Mexico, the lower cost labor? No. But we will make that plant competitive just because we'll make the capital investments there. Right. What that ultimately means is there will be fewer jobs.
I was going to ask you, I mean, to me, I don't see 1 million people working here, but the engineers are nearby, right? You could not make this in Mexico. These cannot be made. You need those great American engineers to do it.
Look, we invented this engine here in Connecticut, right, just up the road in East Hartford, where we have 6,000 engineers. There's another 1,100 engineers. You can't see them in the plant, and there's 1,400 mechanics that work on these lines every day. Right, having the closeness of the proximity to the engineering talent with the shop floor is critical. It's the same reason we're setting up our overhaul and repair facility for the engines in Columbus, Georgia. We didn't want it, we could have put it someplace else like Mexico. We could have put it someplace like China. But we elected to put it in the U.S. because, again, you need to have that engineering talent to support the overhaul process to see what you need to learn as these engines age.
And these engines, as I understand it, they're a great starter. The actual maintenance business is a fabulous business for United Technologies.
Well, that's why we're in the business of selling jet engines. As you know, every time you sell a jet engine, you send a check to the customer of $1 million or so.
People don't know that, Greg. You've told me that. But the fact is that you want to be in the long term. You have 8,000 orders. You get those orders. It's almost a razor blade model.
These are really expensive razor blades. Or razors, rather. Right. I mean, seriously. It's a business where you have to take the very long view. Right. These engines will be in production for the next 30 years. Will be on the aircraft for the next 40 or 45 years. And so if you think about it, you give away the engine up front, or you get paid a small piece, 2/3 of the price of the engine, the cost of the engine, but then you make it up because you are going to overhaul the engine 3, 4, 5 times. I was at the airport yesterday. I saw an old MD-80 taking off with JT-8Ds that were built 40 years ago. I love those engines, right? I mean, it's the same thing. You know, we'll sell spare parts on these engines for years and years, and that's why we're in the business. But that's why there's so few people in the business, because the barriers to entry are huge.
At the same time, I mean, you said when you moved to Otis at Florence, again, you wanted the engineers next to the Otis elevators. That has been your philosophy. When you have highly complex things, you build them here with engineers.
Right.
That's how it works.
You need to have the engineering talent, because as we talked about, these engines don't go together all that easily at first. And there's a lot of learning. There's a lot of things that have to be changed as you go through the process of learning out. You know, today it takes us about 17 days to assemble an engine here.
Okay.
In another year, it'll be 10 days, right? Eventually, we'll get that probably in half from even there.
Will you get to the 200 that you were hoping?
Well, this year we talked about 150.
Well, but we have an outside hope that you can beat that.
Well, let me tell you, we'll actually ship more engines than that.
Okay.
But what we won't ship is fan blades, and we've talked about that as well.
Right.
So we'll ship well in excess of 150 engines to Airbus. You can see them. None of these engines, of course, have fan blades. Those all get shipped directly from our plant in Lansing, Michigan, to Toulouse, where they are assembled onto the engine.
All right. How good is the world for your different product lines, and how valuable will that money be repatriated, both to shareholders and to engineering and to American manufacturing money?
Just think about this. If tax reform is the key for UTC, because we've got today $27 billion of permanently reinvested earnings overseas. $27 billion. $6 billion of that sitting in cash.
That you want to bring here.
That I could bring back tomorrow and invest here. Whether it's, I don't care, paying dividends, buying back stock, or investing in the next technology engine.
Doing more research and development in America.
We're already spending $2.5 billion a year on R&D, even with the burden of not having access to the cash. So you can imagine, again, there really could be a renaissance in manufacturing in the U.S. if we get a competitive tax rate.
Right. So of the things that you're most proud of, I mean, you build the best stuff. You're an American in a globalist environment, but you're also now thinking larger. I mean, you're still a globalist. I mean, if I asked you, are you a globalist?
Absolutely.
But you are now more concerned in this regime. You get a call from the president-elect. Do you think some of this is because United Technologies is just a very well-known company, or is it the luck of the draw that someone had a camera up and saw an executive say, listen, we're removing this factory? Which is it?
Well, I think there's a little bit of bad luck involved, if you will, if I have to really be honest with you, Jim. The fact is, when we made the announcement in Indiana, and we were trying to be as humane as possible, giving the employees a 3-year lead time on the announcement. Unfortunately, and not unexpectedly, you know, someone took issue with it. They didn't like the fact that we're moving the jobs to Mexico. Everybody's seen the YouTube 3 minutes. It's unfortunate, and I think, you know, that just happened to get in front of Mr. Trump.
Right.
And he saw that, and he picked up on that as a campaign issue.
In Indiana was important.
In Indiana, and you know, he's used the message not just in Indiana, but through the whole Rust Belt. And if you think about, you know, the election of Trump, I mean, it is because of the Midwest and the Rust Belt went with Trump.
I mean, Hillary had won, then that plant might have gone. Yes. Okay. With this kind of inspiration and discussion and bargain and art of the deal, can United Technologies lead the renaissance? Are you in a position to lead the manufacturing renaissance?
Well, absolutely. We're doing huge innovation, right? We're not talking just about these engines, right? Whether you're talking about the next generation of elevators that we're working on, the next generation of aerospace systems that we're working on, power electronics, what we're doing in the carrier business in terms of some of the 3,000-ton coolers that we're making. I mean, there is truly going to be huge growth in manufacturing here in the U.S., but a big piece of that will end up getting exported. Think about it this way. Of UTC's U.S. sales, which are about 30% of our total sales, $10 billion get directly exported today. Almost all of that aerospace. That supports 40,000 jobs here in the U.S. 40,000. Now, if you think about Pratt Whitney, they're going to add about 8,000 manufacturing jobs in the U.S. in the next 10 years, right? Those are good-paying jobs.
That's real hot. Those are the jobs that we want in this country.
Which pale in comparison to the 800 jobs we were able to save in Indiana.
That's important.
These are very, very high-paying jobs, high-technology jobs. And I think, again, our challenge is where do we get the people to do that? And part of that is our obligation to train people for the next generation.
But you provide more scholarships than any other company. That's really important.
It's about lifelong learning, Jim.
Exactly. I want to thank Greg Hayes, Chairman and CEO of United Technologies. Greg, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Booyah! Jim Cramer here from Mad Money. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube. Click here to subscribe and get the jump on my exclusives with CEOs, plus market news, investing advice, and a whole lot more.